Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategy Gaming Dojo, where we find, learn, and play the great strategy games. Today, we are continuing on with our Let's Play of Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific Admirals Edition. Now, this is episode number 2 of the Let's Play. It's kind of a continuation of the basic tutorial series that we did. So, in episode 1, we set up our forces in the first 3 alphabetical locations on this spreadsheet that we're using. It's by a gentleman named Cole, and Cole's put together this spreadsheet that kind of gives you the ideal setup for the Allied troops. Now, you may say, well, gosh, I want to figure this out on my own. And I understand that, and you will get to that point. But if you haven't really played the game much or you are just starting out, going through that spreadsheet is an incredible way to learn the game and to start to understand why you're moving things, where you're moving them, and how to do that. So that's what we're doing. We're just going down the spreadsheet where I do quote unquote disagree, or let's just say I play differently or have a different idea about it. I am noting that, but for the most part, 98% of the time, we're just kind of following along on that spreadsheet. So you see here what we did in Alaska up here at Anchorage, and there's Anchorage's card. Anchorage has got some anti-sub stuff going here. We got some task forces going. We've got Dutch Harbor, and we talked about Adak. We also were over here at Port Blair, and we did a little bit, the one thing you can do really at Socotra, we're building up the fortifications there and nothing else. That's Italian East Africa, just off the coast. So those were the 3 locations that we looked at last time. This time we really get into a very important area. It is next up alphabetically, and that is Australia. Now, I wish this game I could zoom in and out with my mouse wheel. You just you can't do it, unfortunately. I mean, the game was put out some time ago, and there are a few things that you just can't do that you can do in modern games. It would be helpful to do that with Australia because Australia is massive. It is an entire continent on its own, and there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's also just very important for the game, as it was historically in World War II. And I'm not sure enough people understand that. I think that, a lot of people that are, kind of connoisseurs of history or like history, they know the Canadians really helped with the Normandy invasion, that Australian troops, British troops, American troops have pretty much always fought together in every war that America has been in the 20th century and so far in the 21st century. Australia is part of that old Commonwealth, right? The old British Empire, which did include America at one time, and they all kind of stick together. But my point in going down this road was to say I don't think a lot of people understand some of the sacrifices the Australians made in the Pacific theater and how important of a staging base it was for the eventual defeat of the Japanese. And if we look at the big overall picture, the Japanese are immediately pushing down the Philippines. They're immediately going to Borneo. They're immediately coming down the Malay Peninsula, and they will be getting over here into the Dutch East Indies. Well, if you take all of this away, you don't have too much left. It's very remote out here. We have Port Moresby. The British have a base here, but otherwise the island out here is very remote. So if you didn't have Australia as a staging base, you're talking about Pearl Harbor and then a bunch of little islands and New Zealand down here. You couldn't really stage any attacks into this kind of underbelly eventually of the Japanese expansion. And so Australia, of course, very, very important. It's very, very important that the United States could get supplies over here to supply Australian troops, British troops, eventually American troops up, through this corridor. So we will be running a lot of task forces from the United States Down, depending on where we can set our defensive line here, down south, maybe as far south as Tahiti and across, or maybe we can kind of cut that distance if we start to push the Japanese back and it's not a threat. But we will be running those task forces from LA, San Francisco, occasionally Vancouver, Seattle, down here through the Pacific and over to Brisbane and mainly Sydney. Sydney is the big, massive port that we will be doing a lot of in and out to Sydney. Now, you may say, well, okay, why are you talking about that now? Because we're going to be setting up Australia. Well, it just so happens that you have a lot of ships over here in Sydney, let's say. We have 57 ships in port, so it's going to take me some time to put this together. I'm going to go away, set up some of these task forces, not make you watch all of that. But some of the big endurance cargo ships, you see some of these, anything above, let's say, 12,000 endurance is going to be shipped, is going to sail over to LA predominantly and fill up over there and then come back. So it's going to be, doing kind of a deadhead run the first time back over to the United States to fill up with stuff and then come back, with supplies, with fuel. Now, one thing to keep in mind about Australia is Australia has a lot of heavy industry down here. And, if you're kind of a newcomer to the game, you'll say, well, what does that mean? So we're down here. It's got, a lot of manpower, Sydney does, resources. It does have some oil, not a ton, but it's got 500 heavy industry and it's got refinery and it's got a ton of industry. If you look over here at Melbourne, the same. I think Brisbane has some. It does. Now, what does that mean? Light industry, heavy industry, refinery. Refineries take the fuel and turn it. Of course, I did that backwards. They take the oil, turn it into fuel. Uh, Heavy and light industry take resources, they take oil, they kind of mix them all together, and out comes supply. So supplies are generated here in Australia in massive numbers if you can get fuel over in this direction. I think a minute ago I just said oil and resources go together. It's fuel and resources go together, make supply. So you can generate a ton of supply if you can just get the fuel. And we will be bringing supply as well because the US has unlimited amounts of supply that we might as well get it over here where the action is, right? So we will be running convoys back and forth from Australia to the US. Now, what else is going on? Well, Melbourne's the second kind of major Australian city, although Melbourne, I will say, since it's here down at the southern tip, is not as important. There just isn't as much that goes on. Now, you'll see there's a ton of ships at port, but because it's so much further away than Brisbane or Sydney, a lot of those will send up here to the East Coast. Um, oh, another very, very important town on this East Coast is Townsville. And why is that? Because it's really the only, sort of major town up here in the northeastern section of the country. So you've got a port that we could take all the way to 7 if we want. You've got an airfield we could take to 10 if we want. We will be bringing stuff in here, but we will also be staging off to Port Moresby, which is kind of our toehold here in Papua New Guinea. Some of this stuff is going to come under pressure by the Japanese very early, especially Rabaul, which is an important place. There's not a whole lot you can do to keep it, I'll just be honest with you. So Townsville up to Port Moresby, which we will try to hold through hell or high water. It's also a very important supply area that we can go out here to Nomaya. Now we'll be doing a lot of that from Brisbane and Sydney as well. Townsville can become important if U.S. subs that are operating up here in the Dutch East Indies, you don't want them going all the way back to Pearl Harbor. And there's, as the Dutch East Indies start to fall, there's not necessarily a great place to bring them back to. You're going to lose the Philippines, and your submarines are all based at the Philippines as the U.S. player. So you've got all these nice subs up here. You see one of them here. It's kind of hard to see, but it's going back to Manila. That's its home base. That's all the U.S. subs are that way, and we have more, kind of up in here. We'll get into setting all of those eventually when we get to the Philippines section. But as you start to lose these nice bases, and let's say you can't keep Suera Baja, really the only place you can bring them back to repair is if you build up the port at Townsville. They'll have to come down here. So just something to keep in mind. Townsville, very important. Darwin is of extreme importance. I mean, we'll do everything to hold Darwin. You just you can't lose that. Darwin will be kicking off supply up here to, Ambon, Koapang, all of these little areas that we're going to try to hold on to, Kendari, Makassar, we try to hold on to those as long as we can as the Allied player, hopefully throughout thick and thin. But as Suera Baja and Batavia over here, the big Dutch bases, if they fall, then Darwin is where you have to supply all of these places from, really, because it's the only place of any size on the northern coast. You can take the port to 6. That's not great. We'd rather be able to take it to 7, right? Because it gives us all those rearm bonuses for the ships. But it is what it is. This starts out as a natural 3. You can take the airfield much higher. We'll be bringing a lot of planes back to Darwin so they don't get destroyed on the runways or out in the airfields of the Dutch East Indies. Now, if we go further along here, you know, Carnarvon, easy for me to say, Port Hedland, Broome, Derby, all of these places are pretty small. They're just not big enough to handle any kind of load of supplies. But as we get over here to the west coast, we've got Perth, arguably the most important location in the game outside of, let's say, Pearl Harbor, maybe. Um, Perth is where the British supply and oil or fuel, I guess, but it's going to be fuel. Fuel that we will be bringing from Cape Town. So this run from Cape Town to Perth, we just wear this run out. So when we set up things over here at Perth, whatever we've got there, and when we set up Cape Town, the Perth will do a deadhead over to Cape Town first time, load up, and then we'll just probably be doing continuous supply because you should be fairly safe on that run. And it is considered for experienced Allied players, some of them will not even try to go US to Australia from this east to west here. They will run cargo or convoys from the eastern U.S. Box all the way around to the Cape Town box and then down to Perth because you should be okay as long as you can hold this strait, especially between Batavia and Oosthaven, or this strait down here. You just don't want the Japanese taking bases on the west side of Java, and then they can really run subs out here and play some havoc. So those are kind of the high points. I mean, some other place to remember in Australia, Alice Springs. You'll see it's kind of stinks. The reason Perth is so great is it's a small railway that turns into a major railway that you can just pump fuel over here that actually links all the way from the west coast all the way to this heavy industry in the east coast. That makes Perth great. Now, gosh, how I wish Darwin had the same thing. But you'll see its rail stops here, a little past Catherine. And if we go down, it stops here at Alice Springs. So any of our troops we're going to be pushing north towards Darwin, we're going to have to run them by rail up here to Alice Springs, um, or over here Cloncurry. You can go around this way as well. But either one, then we're going to have to literally march them across the Australian desert I think this is like 1,400 miles or something crazy like that. It is a long way. So fantastic. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out that Alice Springs, that must have been a hopping town during World War II. All these GIs, were Australians called GIs, or is that only America? Um, Anyway, these guys in the Australian Armed Forces were, shipped here to Alice Springs and then had quite a journey in front of them. One rule of thumb to think about, Sydney to LA is about 8,000 nautical miles. At 40 nautical miles, that'll tell you about how many hexes we're talking about. So that's just a rule of thumb when we start looking at these cargo ships. But I am going to go now and go uh, set up quite a bit of it. We may do this over 2 episodes. We may do everything else and then hold Sydney back because there's just a lot more going on at Sydney that we need to talk about and set up, or maybe Sydney and Brisbane. But I'm going to go set it all up and then we'll see how much we can get through. All right, I'll see you on the other side. Okay, welcome back. I'm not sure if I'm saying that to you or to me. For you, it was a couple of seconds. For me, of course, I had this set up in like 5 minutes. I wish that were true. It does take quite a bit of time, to set up all of these task forces, to move the troops around. And there is a lot of stuff moving around in Australia, but if you're like me, and you've made it this far into these videos, you enjoy that and you find it really interesting. I know I do. I learn new stuff every time I set this up. I was actually thinking when I was setting it up this time, I was like, I did those basic tutorials and I really wouldn't change hardly anything about them. I really liked how they turned out, but I was thinking maybe I should do like 3 medium tutorials instead of basic tutorials because there were a lot of concepts that Australia brings in, different things that we do, whether they be waypoints or, ship repair. They're just, some concepts that we touched on the basic tutorials, but are a little more advanced when you actually get in and start setting up, your forces. So anyway, I think this is probably going to take two, and I'm going to cut this into two episodes because there's just so much that's going on here. And I would like to talk about it. Hopefully, you want to listen to a more detailed discussion of this. Now, I don't want these to get into like an hour and a half of just setting up Australia. But that being said, I think I'll do the West and the North and try to keep these, around 40, 45 minutes as opposed to an hour and a half. I'll break them up a little bit. But Australia is very important. There's a lot of stuff going on here and it just matters. So let's jump into it and talk about Perth. So we'll start over here. I will actually, maybe start here in Esperance. And in Esperance, there is a base force. That base force is just going to sit here. Not really. It is going to build up fortifications and build up an airfield. Now, why is that, and why did I want to talk about Esperance? I'm not going to talk about every base on the map, but I did want to mention this one because, as Cole mentions in his spreadsheet, Sedona and Esperance are the link between West and East Australia. So, when you're trying to take your air groups from east to west in Australia, if you go up into the desert, I mean, there's nothing there. It has to be Seduna to Esperance. Now, you'll notice with a lot of your air groups, they will at least have a maximum range that can get you there. I think this is maybe, well, let's just count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I thought it was 17. It may be it may be 16 if you did it and some, as the crow flies. It may be 16, but I thought it was 17. So, it's 17. Most of your planes will have that kind of range. So if you needed to move planes from the East Coast to the West Coast, you could daisy chain them. If you can get them to Seduna, and we'll build up Seduna, we'll build up Esperance, you can take them all the way from west to east without putting them on a railroad. You can actually fly them, which means, each turn you can take them. It would take like 3 turns to get from east to west. So Esperance, we're building up the Air Force there. If you are looking at the spreadsheet, or if you're not, I'll just say, for a lot of these bases, we will build fortifications. I'm talking like 75, maybe 80%, we will build up the fortifications. Maybe about 60, maybe that's high, but 50 or 60%, we will build up the airfield. And why is that? It just takes less supply to build those things. I mean, think about building up a port, and there's also less chance to build up ports, right? Because, for instance, in Kalgoorlie, you couldn't build a port, it's landlocked. Um, I always struggle with this, right? Because I don't want to call it Calgary, and maybe that is how it's pronounced. I don't know. I'm going to look it up after this episode, but I don't want you to think we're in Canada. So I'm just saying Kalgoorlie. Um, but anyway, the point being is airfields, fortifications, we will be building up quite a bit more than we will be ports. Ports, we will do it in very specific locations. It takes a long time. Ports build slower. It's going to take a lot of supply. It's going to take a lot of your engineering. So we only do it it, you know, where it's really necessary, where it makes sense. Looking down here, I'm not going to go through everything. I will say that we had this just random force out here that we march, as you can see, to Bustleton. Now, I don't know, these guys were on shore leave or something, or they were just hanging out down here at the end of the railway. We bring them up to Brusselton. Did I say Brusselton? Not Brussels sprout. It's Bustleton. There we go. We're going to bring them up here. Another thing I do want to point out from this area of the map is Kalgoorlie, and that is because you will see a lot of forces later on that we bring up this major railway, but we have them stop here, even though they're going to Perth. And you may say, if you do go through the spreadsheet, or if you're just playing the game, on your own and figuring it out yourself, why is he doing that? Why is he bringing these forces up a major railway and stopping right here? Well, the answer is twofold. One is once they get here, they've got a major road that they can take, and so having them march or move if they're armor, it just doesn't take that long. And Perth is not like a red alert place. Perth is not going to get attacked in the first, 3 or 4 months of the war. There's just zero chance that Perth could get attacked. So, coming over here and then continuing to rail them here, it just doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. You can just bring them here and then have a march. The other thing, and the real reason you wouldn't want to do that, is we're going to be bringing all kinds of fuel and supplies into Perth. We would rather that this railway here be used for that than moving troops over here to some place that's not going to be attacked. So that's why you'll often see all of the forces that we do move from east to west, and we do move quite a few things because Perth is so important that we'll rail them here and then we have a march the rest of the way. That kind of brings up another point that I just wanted to say that's kind of a big general point, and that is you need to be moving all of your forces out to the coast for the most part. Now, you need base forces at places like this, so like this base force, um, because you need them building airfields or building, ports if you're in a coastal hex, or you want them building up some fortifications if it's important. But for the most part, like infantry units, anti-aircraft, artillery, anything like that that is trapped, quote unquote, up in the interior. So, for instance, here, Broken Hill. We'll get back around to Broken Hill, but just to illustrate the point, we have all of these units going somewhere else. This one's going to Townsville. So that's an artillery unit going to Townsville. We have some armor here, armor regiment. That's going to Alice Springs, which will eventually go on to Darwin. We've set the future objective to Darwin. Um, this armor is going to Townsville, and then this infantry unit is going to Carnes, which is, right up here by Townsville. So as you can see, we're taking things from the south and we're taking things from the interior. We're either moving them north or to the coast. It just makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you take a step back for a second, why are we defending Broken Hill, Australia? What does this gain the Japanese? How would they even get here? So we're taking all those forces and dispersing them, you know, out to the coast, out north, out to Perth, to all of our important towns. Townsville, incredibly important. Cairns, Cairns, Cooktown. We also have Portland Roads, which is a potential base that we'll build, Horn Island, Port Moresby. We're moving all this stuff out to where it matters. And this goes back to something I said in the basic tutorial. Think about every unit and think what offensively is it threatening? What defensively is it protecting? At Broken Hill, nothing's protecting anything. There's nothing there. Um, Also, while I was just talking about that, it reminded me I mentioned earlier in the episode that Darwin is up here kind of on its own. It's got this minor railway that runs from Catherine. It's got a major road from Catherine. But once you get back into the outback here, there's nothing. I mean, Cloncurry comes here with a major road, and then they tried to build it here, and it looks like they just said, hell with it. It's 120 degrees out here. Alice Springs is the main jumping off point for Darwin, if you can believe that. So we talked about that earlier, but you're going to be railing things to Alice Springs, marching them to Catherine, and then putting them on the major road to Darwin. Always check when you look at Australia, check Alice Springs because it's quite likely that you will have sent forces there by rail and maybe forgotten about them a little bit. And you'll just have all these forces out at Alice Springs kind of chilling out. I don't even know what there is to do at Alice Springs. I'm sure it's a beautiful place, but you want to keep them moving to Darwin. Okay, well, so we've gone all around the map here, something I said we weren't going to do, but I just kind of wanted to make those big major points as we jump in here. We also had this little random unit, the 11th Australian Battalion. We're sending them up to Geraldton. Just get that out of the way. Okay, so at Perth, we've got, this air group that's flying anti-sub. Makes sense, right? We wouldn't really be looking for task forces or surface ships down here. The Japanese would not get down here with surface ships, for a very long time. The only thing they're likely to sail down here for, all of 1941, of course, and most of 1942 would be submarines. So we've got our bombers out here. Our bombers can run anti-sub, or they could run naval search when they're not doing attacks. These are the things that they do. They do search and patrol. So we've got them on ASW patrol. We've set a nice little arc here. Subs are harder to detect in deep water. So we've got our plane over deep water. We're hoping our coast watchers would see them if it's in shallow water. So this is what we're running. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got 10 aircraft. We're running 8 sections, but we're only running 4 of those per pulse. So this covers all 8, right? So if we have 10 planes, we're running 40% of them up at ASW. That would be 4 planes. So 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, they cover all 8 sectors. Now, if we had 20 planes, it would cover all 8 sectors at, 2 times during the day. But that's not what we have, unfortunately. Now, our other air wing, we do have 14 aircraft. They are, not any more experienced or unexperienced. They are flying Weiraways. Weiraways, actually, you'll see do more naval search, maybe, although it doesn't really make a huge deal. We are training them to do ASW because that's the only thing we're going to see down here at Perth. Now, you may say, well, why don't we put 14 in the air and keep 10 back? It just so happens that this worked out to be perfect to run these zones once, they cover every one of these zones during a day. So it just worked out that way. Um, if we can train more, the better. Train 100%. Don't forget maximum range 0. So what do we have here for task forces? We've got this tanker group. See, this is what I'm talking about. We can go down so many rabbit holes here. So this tanker group that we had here at Perth, we're going to send them up to Batavia to get out as much oil as we can. Now, that serves two purposes. One is we need oil down in Australia so it can go through all, go across this rail, go to the heavy industry in Southeast Australia and get turned into supplies and fuel. So we we need all the fuel out of the Dutch East Indies we can get. And you'll do this a lot as the allied player early in the game, is you'll get these task forces of tankers. And let's exit. And where are we going? We're coming straight up here. We're going to Batavia, which you can see has 19,900 fuel right now and 25,000 supply. It will continue generating a lot of fuel, as will Palembang, as will Balikpapan, as will Tarakan early on, and Surabaya too. We are going to try to pull as much of that out as we can. We do not want the Japanese to capture fuel. If they capture oil, it's not as bad because they have to send that back to Japan generally to refine it first, which is, there's a lot to that, right? So we're going to try to pull every bit of fuel out of the Dutch East Indies that we can. So we just so happen to have some Dutch ships out here. You can see it's gray. So at least our flagship is Dutch. I don't know what the rest of, we're not going to go through all these ships. This will just take forever if we do that. You will see I put the Latrobe in here and Cole, Cole puts it in here to run some anti-sub. It will fall off as it can't make the endurance. It's showing red now. Um, it's going to be 53 one way to Batavia. So that's a little bit more than the Latrobe's endurance. Sometimes I won't do this early in the game. And as a matter of fact, I think I'm going to take the Latrobe out of there. I just don't think it's necessary. I mean, it's an abundance of caution kind of thing. These guys are going to go to Batavia. We've told them to remain on station. So you'll remember during the basic tutorials, we talked about remain on station and like when would you use this, right? Well, here's a perfect example. Our home port is Perth. We're going to Batavia. Well, if these were just normal orders, and we just had, retirement allowed like we usually do, we may forget because this thing would get up to Batavia, it would get there, it doesn't have any other orders, so it would say, okay, I'm going to turn around and go back to Perth. Next thing you know, you've got a tanker task force that sailed all the way here and it's all the way back here and it doesn't have any fuel on it. And you're like, well, why, why did that happen? Didn't you guys know I wanted you to get fuel? Well, no, they don't. There's not an order to say, hey, go here and pick up fuel. So what you have to do is send it here, have it remain on station. You will see it here as you go around the map. You see there's a task force here, and you'll say, okay, what is that? And then it goes to our naming convention. And I have named this Tanker Perth. Now you may say, hey, earlier you said just don't name it what the home port is. I'm not. Um, it so happens that its home port is Perth, but its mission really is to take fuel from Batavia to Perth. So we name it Tanker Perth. And remain on station means it's going to come up here to Batavia and it's going to sit here until either it gets damaged or it runs out of fuel. For a tanker like this with a big endurance, that would be a very long time. So there's a very good chance we will look at it and say, oh, okay, we have this tanker group here. What did we want to do with them? I don't remember. That's why we give ourselves the additional information here and say, oh, well, that's a tanker to Perth. So we'll dock it, we'll load fuel when we get to Batavia. So there's that tanker group. Then we have these local minesweepers. I'm going to pass over these in most of these towns. I will just say this one time. Every halfway important port, because you have a lot of these AM little C's, these are local minesweepers. They generally just stay in the hex where they're created. In this case, Perth. They search for mines. Perth is very important. It's possible the Japanese could get a mine layer down there and lay some mines and blow up a whole convoy of cargo if you don't have these guys out running around in the port, in the harbor, looking for mines. So we'll have these in almost every decent sized port that we may be running convoys into. So we see that local minesweep Perth, and then you'll notice there's a disconnect here. It says local minesweeping, and then it says ASW Perth. Why is that? Well, because minesweepers can also do anti-submarine. Um, it's not their primary function. Sometimes it's not even their secondary function, but they do have a little bit, and it's only a 1 out of 10. So it's not much, but who knows? They may stumble across it. You really don't need two minesweepers down there at Perth. Normally you wouldn't use a minesweeper quite in this way, but if you don't need two minesweepers, you might as well have this doing something useful. We've set up a little patrol zone for it here. One thing I did want to say generally, if you are following along on the spreadsheet, or whether you are or you aren't, don't get so concerned with having these hexes be exact, meaning if you've picked here, or you've picked here, or you picked here, I, don't don't feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to get this on the exact hex, or the whole game, is going to explode or something. Kind of set them on the map where you think they make sense. I mean, look at this patrol zone. It makes sense, right? Sails out here, goes over here, comes back here, fuels up, goes here. You know, it just kind of makes sense that you're going to patrol this zone. It's a patrol zone, exactly, right? We have this set to max react 1, which makes sense for something that's not even really a anti-sub ship. Let's see, we have cargo. These have big endurances, big capacities. They're going to Cape Town. We'll shoot them over there. They will be empty on the initial trip. And then when we get over there, they are going to auto disband. Now that's something we kind of talked about a little bit in the basic tutorial, but why would we do that? Well, the reason we're going to do that is these are kind of mismatched ships. Um, it reminds me we're around Christmas time now, the island of misfit toys, right? In Rudolph. Uh, maybe you're familiar with that, maybe you're not. The point being is these things are all different. We've got almost an 18,000 endurance. This Tarifa could sail damn near, three-fourths around the world. We've got some 12 threes, but they have different speeds. We have different cargo capacity. I mean, these are just kind of all lumped together because we want to get them all over to Cape Town. And when they get to Cape Town, we're going to auto disband them so we don't think, hey, this is a fully functioning great task force to continue going in the game. It's going to disband, put them all at anchor at Cape Town, and then we can, match them up with things that maybe make a little more sense. We may have another ship over here that's got a big endurance with a big capacity that goes 14, and we'll put the Tarifa with that, for instance. So just wanted to mention that. Uh, oh gosh. Now here's another thing. This is kind of a special order. This one ship, this task force made up of the Chungking, is going to go to Port Hedland. This is the only ship, there may be two or three, but this is the only ship I can remember that's doing something like this, but I will mention it. As I've told you before, we're really just worried about fuel and supplies. Oil and resources, are the inputs that make the other things. And so we don't worry about them as much. We have factories, we have refineries that deal with that, and the game kind of takes care of that for us. This is one exception, and that is that Port Hedland just so happens to have resources here. Why? I don't know. I have no idea why it has resources at Port Hedland, but we're sending a ship up there to get them, to put it into Perth. If you never did this, if you use this ship for something else, it would not matter in the grand scheme of things. But we're going to go up and get those resources because why not? And we've named this Resources Perth. And again, the naming convention, I named the one going to Cape Town, I just named it Cargo because we have no idea what its mission is going to be. But this, it's going to pick up resources in Perth. It's going to remain in station at Headland because we don't want it to just go up there and then immediately turn around and come back until we can give it more orders. So we're going to leave it at remain in station. And then we have another Dutch task force here. Oh, I didn't name this one. Okay. Um, this is the Marpessa. It's a cargo. 14,000. This is a really nice. This is a nice cargo ship. Let's see how much is worth. Yeah, its victory value is 15 points. Victory value is something we're going to get into more. As far as what ships we use for what purposes. But this is going to be a cargo Perth. When it gets over to Cape Town, we've now set its home port to Cape Town. It's going to Cape Town. It's going to get over there, refuel. We're just going to load it up with stuff and bring it back to Perth. It's got a huge capacity. So there's that. I will say we're not going to talk much about the ground forces because the ground forces all stay here. When I do flip around, I kind of look at this unit organization. I like to have like units together. So if you see this unit organization of the 13th Australian Brigade, so I look up here and it's the 16th Australian Battalion. Battalions, 3 to 5 battalions make a brigade. So let's go see where the rest of these guys are if we wanted to form into that 13th Australian Brigade. We find out that it's made up of uh, the 11th, the 16th, and the 28th. Now, which one were we looking at before? The 16th. Okay, let's go back there. So we're looking at this one here. Oh, and that makes sense. It tells you it's at Perth. And then we have two other ones here, the 11th and the 28th. Now you'll see here, they're on the map. Okay. The reason it says the 13th Australian is inactive is because these three units, these three battalions, are not together. So we can't even make the brigade if we wanted to. But if these three all come together, we can combine this. Now, where are we sending these? 48, 150. Why didn't it take me there? Oh, well, it says it's in op mode. Hmm. Let's figure this out really fast. Now I'm curious why it did that. Oh, maybe that's its destination. Interesting. 49, 145. Oh, okay. Dumb as me. We're actually sending the 11th that's up here. You can see the little divot, the little notch here, which means it's moving northeast. It's going to go up here to Geraldton, which is fine. They're all kind of close. If we needed to defend Perth, it's possible we could bring all three of those battalions here and make the brigade because it will be more efficient. It'll have more assault strength if the three of them are together, but there's really no reason to do that. Um, yeah, here's the 28th. Okay, so it's just been split in three, this brigade, into three battalions. They're all right around here at Perth. We could bring them together if we wanted to. 16th. We have a base force, of course we do. We have some nice artillery. This could shoot, at anybody trying to attack Perth. And then we have the Fremantle Fortress. Nice. Look at that gun. Sheesh. Looks good. So really that's it. We're building. Um, now, this is where I'm going to disagree with Cole. I remember why I didn't do this too. I am going to go ahead and expand the port, even though it eats up supply because we're already over. But I would really like this port to get up to a size 7. I don't like when ships have to queue and wait to dock, and that will happen if this is a size 5. I'm sure there are good arguments against it. I'm just telling you that's why I do it this way. I get that we're trying to bring fuel and supply into Perth, so this kind of defeats the purpose, like to eat it up, building more of a port. But I think if it's kind of like, any industry, maybe the big capital investment up front will make it better later on, more profitable, quote unquote, later on. I would like to see this get up to a size 7. Let's do it. We're also doing the airfield and the forts. Um, we talked about Calgary. Geraldton, we have some forces here. They're for the most part, they are going to stay here. It's got a coastal defense as well. Because, anybody looking to come attack Perth, if they can't get into Perth and they think it's too heavily defended, what would be the other logical place to land? Well, it would be Geraldton, right? So we need to keep a decent force there for the same reason we would keep one at Perth. Bustleton, a little less important. But, Geraldton actually has decent air capacity. Anyway, the chances of that happening are not great, but why take, why open ourselves and give out an invitation? Um, we have this one AK ship that was here at Carnarvon. I named it again, Cargo Resources Headland. What the hell does that mean? Well, we're loading up. Um, No, we're not. We don't have anything here. It's 100 supply, 0 fuel. We're going to Headland to get those resources that flow into Headland. We're going to pick them up, and then we set the home port to Perth. So what's going to happen? Of course, we said remain on station. We're going to go there at Headland. We're going to sit there until we remember that we're picking up resources. We're going to dock and load, take them to Perth, and that'll kind of be the end of that. Once it's at Perth with the one batch of resources, we'll just make this cargo headland and probably just run it up from Perth to Headland to give them some supplies, maybe some fuel. Coming around here, we've got Broome. Broome it actually has, a decent sized airfield. It could have an okay sized port. We've just got a base force here, but we are bringing the Gull squad. Let's go look at them really fast. Where are they? It's the battalion. So the Sparrow Battalion and the Gull Battalion. I guess the Australians like bird names. These guys um, are going to load on to a ship. Let's see which one it is. Did I save this? Sometimes I'm good. Yes, I did. I didn't save it to show you the load, but the Gold Battalion here is going to load onto these 3 transports that we've set up, this transport task force, and we're going to take them over to Broome. Why is that? Well, it's kind of the same thing we were talking about with Geraldton and Perth. Darwin is such a major hub. Well, if you're going to try to get into Northern Australia at all, you're probably not going to land at this swamp at Wyndham. There's not a whole lot to do there. And there's just kind of nothing else on the northern coast here. It's either Derby or Broome. So, if Darwin is so heavily defended you can't get to it, you may, try to land one of these 2 places. So we just put some kind of blocking forces there, for lack of a better term. Um, I think I'm going to call this an episode before we get into Darwin, Horn Island. Get down. There's just, there's a lot to cover, but I want to go over it because I find it interesting, and if you really want to learn the game, maybe in some of the later episodes, once we've set up enough of these places, I can just say, hey, remember why we do this, remember why we do that. But we might as well go through them, and for people that want to watch, they can. So, as always, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. This has been Strategy Gaming Dojo. I will see you next time.